Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So tonight I want to talk about the fetters, those things that are the barriers to awakening, and that also fall away as we awaken. Based on the suttas, I used to think that basically you don't really work directly with them so much because the causes or the conditions that the Buddha talked about for stream entry were more about having good friends and, engaging in the Dhamma and so on. It's a whole, collection of things, conditions. But I've realized, picking up and really taking seriously some of the experiences of teachers like Ajahn Sumedho, for example, and he really approached the fetters very directly in his practice. And I think clearly it's paid off. And of course it does, the Buddha is, in many places in the suttas talks about really examining this idea of personality view. So, how did you get this thing? How did we get this idea of who we are? And of course, some of it came in with us from previous lifetimes, patterns that we have, and really, how can we feel responsible for that? Some other incarnation or existence that passed along karma, sankharas. And then when we're born, we acquire these designations. Our name, we get a body. We have no control over what kind of body we get, or so it seems. We start to recognize that the body that we have is considered to be mine at some point when we're very young. And then we seem to be somehow responsible for whether it's fat or thin or healthy or ill or who knows what all. It's hair color, eye color, skin color. We get fully identified with it. We get very strongly identified with our face. And it makes total sense on a conventional level. And we see this body-mind complex as me. And when we investigate deeply, we start to see that it's a collection of conditions. And of course, there's a lot more than just, the physical form, and, it's how, are you smart or not smart? What are the impressions that are reflected back to us? They may be true, they may not be true, but we're given this impression. Are we considered to be talented or not in some way? Are we, considered to have a certain personality? those qualities. Are we shy? Are we outgoing? Whatever. And this is all conditioned, which means none of it is for sure. None of it is stable, permanent. But we really rarely question it, I think. How did this come about? How did this idea of who this person is come about? And how much can it change? So there are some things that we might feel good about this package we have, and some things that we might feel bad about. I was thinking about my mom today. When she was very young, like maybe 2, she had scarlet fever. And she was super, super sick. And she lost all of her hair. And she said that she was told later that before that happened, she had really beautiful hair that was curly. And then later, not so nice after it came back in. And she was really smart, and then not so much. She hated school. She was super shy and self-conscious. She worried about those 2 things her whole life. She was self-conscious about those 2 qualities. What are we carrying with us? Beliefs about ourselves, how we feel about this identity. And do those ideas hold us back? And then even if we think they do, or we think they don't, or we like it or we don't like it, how true is it? So the Buddha is really encouraging us to ask, is this me? Is this mine? Is this who I am? Or when Rahula, you probably know this story, when Rahula is about 18 years old and he's looking at the Buddha and he's thinking, wow, my father's really good looking and I look like him. And the Buddha turns around and he says, Rahula, any form, past, present, future, fine or coarse, near or far. There were a few other, descriptors, any of it. See it for what it really is with wisdom. Not me, not mine, not myself. And Rahula says, just the body? He said, no. Feeling, mental formations, perceptions, sense consciousness. But we keep carrying these things with us as if we own them. And we're somehow responsible, or maybe we feel blamed, or maybe we feel congratulated that we have these particular characteristics. And this is all part of our personal identity conditioning. So how can we work with this? How can we see it for what it is? So one thing that's really helpful is to hear about it over and over again. That all of this stuff, they're conditions that integrate together. They seem solid, and then they disintegrate. So we all know it's going to disintegrate. And we still hold to it as if it's a real thing. Or It integrates together, and at some point it changes. And we don't like it, or we like it. But either way, it's not stable. It can change again. Like my mom and her intelligence and her hair, or anything. And think about, what's my mental capability going to be in 10 years? I'm 71 now. You know, you start out life, things change pretty fast. You get in the middle of life, it seems like things change more slowly, unless there are certain events. You get towards the end and it's changing quickly again. You never know. How about physical capability? You know, do you know people who work so hard to try to keep it all rolling? You know, to keep it functional and fit? I know someone, I think she was approaching 80, and I said, you know, you look so young. And she said, yeah, I go through a lot to keep it that way. It takes a lot of effort and money. But then it's a losing battle, of course. But none of this is intended to discourage us. It's intended to encourage us to look at what's true and become free of that identification. And it's not just the way we look or, you know, some of these characteristics I've been mentioning, but it's also our patterns of emotion. Very much a part of our personal identity. How we react to things. Are we, well, standard character types in the Pali Canon, you know, are you a greed type? Are you a anger type? Are you a delusion type? We tend to have all three, all of us, but we might lean more heavily in one direction. And then how much of this is just habit? Can we change it? I'm convinced we can change it to a very large degree. Although you do see arahants that even though they're fully free from greed, hatred, and delusion, they still act according to their personalities to some degree. Even if there's a lot of metta, the reprimands of their students might come out really fiery, anger type. But there's no residual feeling in them around it. Just to use it to light a fire under their students. They're not caught up in it. They're not identified with it. How do we de-identify? How do we stop believing in the aversion, the desire, the sadness, the fear? How do we separate from it and see it for what it is? Some of this is also social and cultural conditioning, not just personal conditioning. Social and cultural conditioning comes along, obviously, with whatever we're told about ourselves. You know, you're from this country, you have this culture. Religious conditioning is social, cultural. That had a big impact on my life and my beliefs and my understanding. And the forming of perfectionism, the forming of worry, am I good enough? The religious conditioning was, when you die, you're going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. And in that particular religion, most likely you're going to go to hell. Because only a few chosen ones go to heaven. And it was a Calvinistic, your name is already written in the book of life. It was really, really dark. But that was an imprint, it's like, and many of us in this culture carry around this idea of, am I good enough? So we want, as we practice, as we develop on the path, we want to be able to kind of excavate these social and cultural effects on us. And this too are just sankharas. You can look at any of them and see through them as solid entities that are true or false. And as we do that, then we can loosen up a little bit around how identified we are with them. And I've only recently come to understand that this is the second fetter, that idea of rites and rituals. Before that, I thought it was more narrow. But I can see that, we have a friend who was raised Buddhist, culturally Buddhist. And there would be chanting in the household in the morning, every morning, the Karniya Metta Sutta. But then after the chanting's over, there'd be fighting and squabbling and harsh reprimands. And this young person was like, yeah, this is meaningless, this ritual. And that's something to watch out for in ourselves. Ajahn Ghana talks quite frequently about his feeling that there's too much emphasis on samadhi. And people really get into developing samadhi, but they get up from the cushion and they're arguing with people. So it's something, like none of us here, I think, are picking it up in that way. We're all looking at the range of the teachings and the development, the whole Noble Eightfold Path, virtue, samadhi and panya, which is really important. So when we look at this cultural conditioning and we start to recognize that things we've been conditioned to love, to hate, to feel like we need to protect, may not be as clear-cut as we thought. And then we can start to separate from it and not hold it so tightly. So I think what's important as we practice is to recognize what are the patterns that bring dukkha. What are your particular patterns where dukkha arises? Is it feeling bad about something that comes up from the past? Is it being triggered by things that bring up anger? Is it something that brings up a lot of desire? Any of these patterns are so easily identified in so many of us. And it's always something for human beings. We have conditioning in a context, this samsaric context, where there is suffering. And we're going to have something like this. That's how we got here. There is delusion, misunderstanding, which means we have dukkha. So when we identify what the pattern is, then we can start to look at, how do I change this habit? No matter how frequent it occurs, no matter how deeply ingrained it is. There are different components, I think, to the way out of this identification and its attendant dukkha. And of course, one of them is to be willing to face it. It's very clear, First Noble Truth. So we stop suppressing it, we stop making excuses for it, we stop believing that it's actually got an upside to it. And we recognize this actually is unwholesome. So that investigation of states, second factor, is it wholesome or not? Sometimes we're confused about that. We believe that this is protecting us. After all, that's how we developed it. We have some conditioning around it and reasoning for it. But when we start to trust more in the Dhamma, then we can start to recognize that it's unwholesome. Even something that it feels like started out, I mean, it usually starts out in what's thought of as a good way. Like for me, as a child, wanting to be good, wanting to please my parents. This isn't a bad thing. But you don't realize for a long time that there's no way to please them. There's no end to it. You want them to be happy. You want them to love you. And they do, somewhat conditionally. And are you, if you're worried about whether you're going to be good enough, then this perfectionism really can take hold, and the regrets over whatever has happened that we screwed up. Instead of being conditioned, and some people are conditioned to understand that mistakes are normal, they happen and it's okay. I remember this one person who became a monk, and they broke a glass, and they were waiting to get yelled at for this, and it didn't happen. And they were like, yeah, the glass is already broken, it's okay. Whole different view than what this person was conditioned with, My tendency was for things to come up in my mind that I felt were stupid or, embarrassing, or things that I made mistakes over, and it just come back again and again and again with this painful feeling. You might have a pattern like that, you might have a different one. You might have a few. Regardless, they're not fixed, they're not eternal, they're just sankharas. And part of what it really helps to keep hearing about them being sankharas, and to keep hearing that samsara has the light and the dark. There's no way to perfect it. There's no way to perfect this personality. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that turn out well. There are going to be things that don't work. And even what's good and what's not good, when we step out of samsara, that's no longer the lens through which we see anything. If that makes any sense. And the Nibbana doesn't have good or bad or light or dark, right or wrong. And kind of try to wrap your head around that. When Ajahn Chah said, that Dhamma, Nibbana, they're above bad and beyond good. So how do we start? Obviously we're encouraged to look at what's wholesome and unwholesome, because the wholesome helps us to become free of samsara. The unwholesome keeps us locked into samsara. So we do want to recognize that, but we also need to recognize what's naturally part of the human experience, the conventional reality experience. And that is that it can never be made perfect. And you can see the patterns of hatred and greed and violence and abuse and all of this stuff continue to come and go. As much as we all would love it to be peaceful and loving and accepting everyone, and we can imagine this perfect world, but it never turns out that way. But our heart is invested in it as long as we see it as the truth. And when we see through it and understand what it really is, there's still the compassion, they're still operating in conventional reality, they're still taking care of things and helping, all of that, but not with the same drama, the internal and external drama that we have when we're identified with it. So, many times we talk about what happens when we turn towards this pattern that we identify in ourselves, whatever it is, and how to be present with the experience, the feeling of it, and stay with it and observe it rather than be involved in it. But let's say we've done that many times with this particular pattern we have, and it's still happening. When I was trying to understand why memories were so painful and what to do with them, I went to see Ajahn Sucitto once when I was staying for a winter retreat at Chithurst Monastery, and talked to him about it. And I know some of you have heard me tell this before, but here it is. He said, I doubt that anything you've done is that bad. And I'm thinking, well, you don't know me or my past. And then he brings up Angulimala, and I'm like, oh boy. Yeah, I'm not a serial killer, I can grant you that. But this is not helping me. And then he said, just imagine how big Angulimala's heart had to be to hold all that. And I thought, oh, okay, that made an impression, because then I knew one thing I needed to do was to grow my heart, to be able to hold whatever it was that I had screwed up in doing in the past. And yet the memories still kept rolling through. And even with insight, even knowing these khandhas aren't self, that habit still kept happening. And it's because it's habit, it's karma, it's like this energetic pattern that without even realizing, I kept feeding. Just by, the thought would come up, the pain would be there, and I'd go, oh. And then I started really listening to Ajahn Gunha. Cut off the past. Let it go. Why can you cut off the past? How can you cut off the past? How do you stop that? I mean, on an intellectual level, reflecting on it, or even, intellectually and also with reflection, letting those questions sit there, and recognizing, what is the past, and who was that did that, and how long ago, and who cares? Things like that. I think all of that helps. But I think what's really brought a huge change has been that when a memory comes up and that painful feeling is there, not taking it in, not letting it touch the heart. It's not suppression, but it's a clear no. And it's not pushing it away either. It's not either wanting to get rid of, but it's a clear knowing the danger, the gratification, and the escape. Like the danger, seeing that this really is a barrier to your happiness. This really is something that's holding you back from freedom. And it keeps repeating. It has no end if we keep giving it energy. And then to be able to kind of let all of these factors of, listening to the Kruba Ajahns, reflecting upon the nature of reality, gradually developing our paramis, our enlightenment factors, and then to really see clearly and say, no. I've been with this feeling so many times, I don't need to look at it again. I know what it is. I can say that I'm a totally different person now than the person who did that in the past, because this thing keeps changing all the time. More than knowing it intellectually, you get to feel it in your system. And then gradually, some memory comes up and it's weaker. And you say, no. Who was that person? Who is this person now? It's okay. Collection of causes and conditions. Earlier today I said to Ayya Chitananda, right now I can't remember any of those things I did in the past that I felt bad about. And she said, should I tell you about them? She knows what they are. I said, you mean it's not just the reconditioning of my current brain, I have to work on my auxiliary brain too? Oh boy. So you might find a different way with whatever pattern you have. I mean, clearly there are many ways to work on habits. The fact that we know it's just a habit, a karmic habit, it doesn't have any benefit, it only brings harm. The same is true when we want something in our life to be different than it is. Maybe there's a circumstance or a person, something that we want to be different than it is, and we can't quite get past it. We can't really accept this is how it is. How do we come to accept it? Some of the reflections that might help are, if this is another person, someone we love, someone we're close to, the reflection that they have their own karma, they have their own path. They've come in with their own karmic load. They've had their own conditioning. Even if we are their parents and we've been part of that, they still have their own part in it. As they grow, it's up to them to work this out, just like we do have to ourselves. The more we let go of wanting them to be different, I think the more respect we have for them. It's really respectful to see the people the way they are and accept the way they are. And to see that maybe we can support them, but can we support them in a good direction, being and becoming what their trajectory is, or what they're moving towards. You know, there are times when maybe we can warn them if we see them making bad choices. But sometimes we can't do anything about it. And even we might wonder, maybe there's some reason that they have to go through this suffering and learn for themselves. So looking at how do I let go? How do I disentangle from this tangling with someone else's life? I think recognizing that we are not this solid entity and neither are they helps. So seeing our own patterns, knowing our own habits, recognizing what's holding us back. What is it going to be like when you completely let go of the sense of self? What is it going to be like? How will you see the world? How will you operate in the world? And maybe you can't, this is not a question to be answered intellectually. This is a question to contemplate, to see, you know, like, what is it that's keeping me impacted by this conditioning I've been given, personally and culturally? Can those two fetters drop? And how is that related to the third one? Doubt in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Because that third one, I think, also carries the doubt we have in ourselves of whether we can awaken or not. Really look into these. I remember someone telling me they heard Ajahn Pasanno say there's no reason that you would not realize stream entry in this lifetime. Any of you. I believe that about any of you. You wouldn't be here doing this. You have that opportunity. And it's not far away. It has to do with shifting our perception, shifting our perspective, letting go of these conditioned patterns that hold us back, that bring us dukkha, that debilitate the heart. I think that's all for this evening, except one thing. It is true that if you're on 8 precepts, you can eat as soon as it's light enough to see the cracks in your hands. If you want to eat something before morning puja, it's okay.
Sadhu